We're very excited for today's discussion. It's hard to pick up a newspaper or turn on the news or something and not see Ukraine mentioned somewhere as part of everyday current affairs. So I'm very pleased to introduce Lada Roslycky. She is the founder and managing director of Black Trident, and she has quite a few slides to go through, so I am not going to take up a lot more time. I'm just going to turn it over to her, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you, Doug and Third Order Effects for arranging this webinar. I hope that the participants will have some questions and also find the presentation interesting. I would also like to apologize for this echo. I just can't get rid of it. So it is what it is. So as you know, my presentation is entitled Ukraine Between Occupation, War and Freedom, because that's exactly what Ukraine is today. At the onset, I would like to let you know that Black Trident is a limited liability corporation, and our objective is to promote security and defense cooperation with Ukraine. And whatever you may hear today, Ukraine is really, really nice. This presentation is not going to be lighthearted, and there will be a mutilated body coming up during the presentation. I will try to give you a heads up before that slide comes, but you have been warned. A little bit about Black Trident. Our company has over 15 Ukraine specialists from 7 countries. Our expertise spans over 150 countries. We're proficient in 19 languages, which is quite unique. And almost half of us have multiple postgraduate degrees, as well as some military armed force experience. I would like to thank again Third Order Effects and all of the Black Trident team who supported and offered help with the arrangement of this presentation. This presentation reflects the approach that Black Trident takes to analyzing and working in the market of defense and security, namely the Copenhagen School. The Copenhagen School of Security Studies is an important and unique approach to security studies because it believes in cross-sectoral analysis, and this helps in the analysis and also strategic planning and defense, offering a multi-dimensional clarity. Today, we have a lot of topics to get through. It's a snapshot, and I'm sure that some people are going to think that I have missed some important topics. I am not going to go into very deep detail about the internal ongoings in Ukraine unless somebody asks and I have the answer. We will start with mapping Ukraine and considering the Russian occupation. Corruption will be a topic, but I will address it from a slightly different perspective, different from the generally accepted perception of what corruption is. And this element will be important to show that a specific type of corruption that exists in Ukraine also poses a very serious national security threat to the European Union and Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic allies, including, of course, the United States. Nord Stream 2 cannot not be discussed, although it's a painful topic. Russian armed conflict against Ukraine will be discussed, and it's important to keep in mind that it is ongoing, and Ukraine is very unfortunately losing lives on the front lines almost daily. We have a military buildup we should consider. Ukraine's cries for NATO, a little bit of an inside look into that, and as well considering how the NATO question could be approached differently. Cybersecurity almost at the end, which is something that our globalized world cannot ignore. In fact, most people should start educating themselves if they are in the sector or even if they're not. And finally, the defense sector and defense industry reform, which can be very confusing to a lot of people. I'm not going to say anything about COVID beyond the following 3 words: contradictions, roads, and borders. Contradictions, mixed messaging, and I'm sure that Ukraine is not the only country on the planet who has really confused its populace due to the mixed messaging. Ukraine may be unique in the fact that it used last year just about 15% of its COVID fund, which was 2.4 billion, to fund roads. So those who survive COVID will maybe have better roads in Ukraine. And borders are also an aspect that we should be paying attention to. In the Black Sea region, we see a risk and a very serious potential of the Russian Federation manipulating or abusing the pandemic to limit international travel, particularly between Turkey. And one of the political, 3 of the political reasonings behind this are related to Turkey's growing defense relationship with Ukraine, particularly as it relates to unmanned vehicles, UAVs, and its position on Tartars, Crimea, as well as Turkey's role in Syria. So those are the 3 words, no more about COVID today. Mapping Ukraine, it's very important for people to understand why is Ukraine important, particularly for US policy and for the Euro-Atlantic community. A lot of people have this idea that Ukraine has appeared or disappeared. A lot of Russian propaganda actually purports that Ukraine has been created by the CIA and that its language is a fake language. So I would like to take you through a few maps to bring you into the local geopolitical area that we're going to be discussing today. This map dates from the early 20th century, and I call your attention to all of these light blue areas. This map was found in a Czech library, National Archive Library, and it coincides with Russian information and mapping is found and related to 1914. So this is what it looked like at the beginning of the 20th. This is what Ukraine looked like at the beginning of its independence. 1991, big, healthy, full of promise, no armed conflicts, although a lot of issues, particularly related to organized criminal groups and political criminal relations directed through the Kremlin. We will discuss this a little bit further. And some of the key players who were involved in transnational organized crime in Ukraine during its early periods now belong to the group of oligarchs, which we will also discuss later. Today, Ukraine is in a little bit of trouble. As you can see in the on its eastern side, this area contains Luhansk and Donetsk, very close to Mariupol, which is still under government control, and we hope that it will remain so, and Crimea. So Crimea has been illegally annexed, and the Russian Federation makes no secret of it, that Russia is in control there, while the Donbass or LNR, DNR regions are politically more complicated, and the Russian Federation to this day denies being a party to the conflict. Also call your attention to Moldova and Transnistria, which will appear on the next slide, the slide after this. So this is to give you a perspective of Russian strategic separatism as it pertains to Ukraine. So Russia would like to regain control over the nations, the peoples, the cultures that it had command over during Soviet times. And the Novorossiya project would like to put this red territory, Novorossiya, under the control of proxies, not necessarily direct control of the Russian Federation. As we can see here, Crimea is shaded in as a color of the Russian Federation. And this is what we're afraid of, being surrounded to this day in Ukraine. Now, bringing it out a little bit to the regional level, it's important to state that to date, Ukraine and the United States and the European Union do not have a sound Black Sea region policy. There was an organization, or there is an organization called Guam, which unites the states that are experiencing Russian strategic separatism, and you can see them here. Moldova, in Transnistria, this little red line is where we have the 14th Army of the Russian Federation in place, amounting approximately 1,500, maybe more men, boots on the ground. Crimea and Donetsk are Ukrainian territories, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, Georgian territories, which have been taken over, effective control has been taken over by the Russian Federation. And most recently, although this is an old conflict and slightly nuanced between Azerbaijan and Armenia, just recently, the Russian Federation has managed to impose its peacekeeping mission on that territory, and that peacekeeping mission already violates numerous agreements in the documents signed by Russia entering the territory as peacekeeper. So yeah, Ukraine is occupied by Russia, not all of it. Territorially, it's Crimea and Donbass. And this Russian occupation also is directly related to very serious international war crimes. We will consider them in a few slides. That's where that image that may shock some people will come up, so please be aware. And also, it is necessary to consider the Kremlin's role in abducting human beings for their political and religious views. So here we can see a zoom in on, excuse me, Crimea and Donbass. And this is where the LNR, DNR territories are. For those who don't know, the LNR and DNR are Russian operatives or separatists that are funded, organized, and under the control of the Russian Federation, particularly the Kremlin and Putin and his proxies. Crimea, under control directly from the Kremlin, and the Sea of Azov is being unfortunately chopped away from Ukraine's access. And it is striking that Biden, just I think it was yesterday, the day before yesterday, said that sanctioning the Nord Stream 2 would be kind of redundant because it's almost completed. Well, if you can imagine that the Russian Federation built a bridge connecting its territory, its proper territory, to Crimea through the Kerch Strait. Could you imagine had the international community halted that illegal construction before it allowed Russia to gain so much additional geopolitical power? Yeah, and it's important to state also to draw a parallel between Russia's policies towards territory and to gas pipelines. The United States repeats that it would like to have a reliable and predictable Russia. Well, Russia is reliable and predictable, particularly in the way that it encroaches on the potential power of neighbors. Crimea has a little bit of a political problem because no real platform has been created to discuss the matters by Ukraine and on the international level. We have some good news in this regard, where the Crimean platform is supposed to be inaugurated this year on August 23rd. This is one day before Ukraine's Independence Day. It's supposed to be a consultative and a coordinating framework where international organizations and allied states, or states who are actually interested in seeing a positive resolution to the Crimean situation, come to pass, with the ultimate goal of the occupation. So we have to keep our eyes out for that at the end of August. And it's important to note that Ukraine has blocked off about 85% of the fresh water to Crimea, which comes from Ukraine proper through the Dnipro. This is one of the key instruments that Ukraine has successfully been able to continue to use. And this policy receives a lot of support and backing from the Ukrainian population. And we hope that it will be able to continue to do so as a major negotiation mark. Moving on, it's also to say that Crimea has suffered a lot with human rights abuses. We will discuss it a little bit later. But now moving to the Normandy format, which was a format of 4 countries created in 2014. Together, Ukraine, Germany, France, and the Russian Federation were supposed to get together and try to figure out a resolution to the armed conflict against Ukraine in Donbass, in parts of Donbass. These negotiations have not been very effective. They have been extremely controversial, and most recently the controversy came to pass on 30th of March of this year, where during a Zoom call, I think, or maybe it wasn't a Zoom call, it was a video call, the Russian President Vladimir Putin, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and French President Emmanuel Macron discussed Ukraine's fate without its participation. Importantly and sadly, during that call, some information had been, some conclusions had been drawn by the 3 leaders, and the information, basically this discussion without Ukraine led to something that is called key clusters for carrying out the Minsk agreements, which we will discuss in the next slide. This leak was, so Germany and France did not leak this information. Rather, Dmitry Kozak from the Russian Federation leaked the information, and this is perceived by some as a latest move of Russia's psychological warfare. Coupled with a spike of armed hostilities on the front lines of Ukraine, it does raise the level of trust or distrust between Ukraine and its Western allies, as well as the term Yalta Conference 2 has started to float around because of the fear that reminiscent of World War II decisions will be made about Ukraine behind its back. So moving on to Minsk talks and the Minsk agreement. In Ukraine, its allies have courses based on teaching integrity in the security and the defense sectors. I have the privilege and honor to teach also during these lectures at the Ministry of Defense. What is painful is during our discussions after my lectures, the apparent fickleness or lack of integrity of the Western partners when it comes to dealing with Ukraine. And some of the concerns are extremely valid and should be understood, and validated and resolved together. So this is an avenue of communication that is deeply needed. The Minsk protocols, and I stress that these are protocols or agreements, they are not international, it's not an international treaty, and it carries limited legal or juridical weight. They're non-binding. However, they're being treated as binding, or have been treated as binding upon Ukraine, particularly until recently. The first Minsk protocol was signed in 2014, arguably under duress, because the Russian army, together with the Donetsk and Luhansk rebels or separatists, were attacking Ukraine en masse. These Minsk protocols are very clearly seen by analysts as a manner or an instrument for Russia to impose its strategy, its geopolitical strategy against Ukraine and the broader democratic regions by, most painfully, demanding that Ukraine change its constitution. that it provide amnesty to some of the people or the perpetrators of heinous crimes. And this is where the international community really needs to participate in developing, should this amnesty question go forward, and it will go forward, is to really be careful in finding, striking a perfect balance between amnesty and international war crimes and human rights abuses. The fear is that once the constitutional changes have been made and amnesty has been granted, elections will take place in these territories, and the results of those elections will not only grant special status to these these areas of the Donbass, but they will also bring terrorist leadership under the direct control of the Kremlin to Kiev and into the parliament of Kiev. Not really something any sovereign state would like to have. Also, it is important to note, particularly if we consider or look at it through the frame of integrity, that Minsk talks do not recognize Russia as an aggressor state. And this already brings in a whole different way of viewing the entire process. This having been said, we do have the Budapest Memorandum that had been signed by a number of countries, and a lot of people forget about France and China. The Budapest Memorandum was signed in 1994 and provides some security guarantees by the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Russian Federation to Ukraine, who had given up the second largest nuclear arsenal in the world in the name of international peace, as well as Belarus and Kazakhstan, who had given up their nuclear weapons, and importantly, France, who was not a full NATO member at that time, signed alongside China particular security statements should the Ukrainian sovereignty be threatened by nuclear weapons. And this is a key element for us to consider, particularly since the Russian Federation, alongside the buildup that we have been seeing, has deployed 6 submarines armed with caliber cruise missiles, which are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. They've been dispatched to Crimea. So a little bit of additional information. In 1994, Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal, but it did keep highly enriched uranium and lots of it. Most recently, with this buildup, we have heard cries saying if the Ukrainian allies do not effectively or more effectively support Ukraine's territorial sovereignty and political strategy and Euro-Atlantic ambitions, that Ukraine will be forced to develop its own nuclear capabilities again. How much highly enriched uranium was handed over by ousted President Yanukovych, who was clearly a proxy of the Kremlin and Putin's puppet, amounts to 245 kilograms. And quite stunningly, this highly enriched uranium has been transferred to the Russian Federation. And all of this, sorry, there's that slide. All of the highly enriched uranium talks are also something that should be used by Ukraine and also by its allies to promote Ukraine's territorial sovereignty and stricter measures against Russia's violations. And all of this, considering its energy, also looks quite stark in light of what is being done with Nord Stream 2. This is a very disturbing photograph, and I put it here on purpose in order to make it even more remind people that this is not just geopolitics, and it's not just land, and it's not just gas. It's about people. And nobody knows how many people have actually died in Ukraine and how many have been tortured. However, we do know that the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court does define and list war crimes. And some people in the international community who belong to allied states profess that Ukraine should not actually consider the option of pursuing this route of holding Russia and its proxies responsible for the war crimes that have been committed. Just recently this week, a huge step forward, because maybe some of you don't know, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is not recognized by the Russian Federation. But Ukrainian law has been adjusted this week, and a new edition, Law 2689, has been accepted and approved, which states that Ukraine has the right to investigate and prosecute international war crimes. One lady who is an amazing warrior for human rights, Lesa or Alexandra Matvichuk, has a wonderful quote, and it's not wonderful, maybe wonderful isn't the right word, but just to give you insight of how much torture has been happening, they, so here's the quote, they told how they were beaten. So she interviewed hundreds of people who had been tortured and held hostage by the Russian operatives. They told how they were beaten, raped, some had their limbs cut off, one woman had her eye taken out with a spoon. The war continues, and there are more and more of these stories. This organization, the Center for Civil Liberties, is, I have to take my hat off for these wonderful warriors of rights. How do I get rid of? Also, the individuals on this photograph should not only make us think about our approaches to amnesty, but consider the fact that the families that are left over are oftentimes left over in dire need of financial, psychological help. The individual near the number one, this is the corpse of Volodymyr Rybak, whose family is one of those that are suffering immensely as a result of this brutal torture and killing. And importantly to state, particularly with these deceased gentlemen, is that directly related to this killing is Igor Strelkov, who has been implicated in the downing of MH17 catastrophe. So the interconnectedness of grave human rights abuses, war crimes, and Russia's geopolitical strategy must not be forgotten. Today, we have over 300 officially recognized individuals being held hostage in the Donbass and in the Donbass territories that are not controlled by the Ukrainian government. In Crimea, the number is slightly smaller. However, in Crimea and in the occupied territories, abductions are commonplace, where people actually just come to your home and abduct you and you disappear, being thrown into prison either in those occupied territories or being shipped off to the Russian Federation, as we have most recently seen being done with Navalny and the young journalist via Belarus, which is a slightly different topic, but very, very closely connected. Currently, Russia holds 133 citizens for political reasons. 114 of these people are illegally incarcerated. 15 of them are from the territory of Crimea. So a lot of human rights and civil protection work that needs to be done. Moving on to corruption. Today I'm going to talk about corruption as in korupcja and not as in corruption as in bribery and more corruption as statecraft a la the Kremlin. Treacherous corruption that demands its victims or its participants to actually betray the state that they are supposed to be loyal to, and supporting the territorial sovereignty and integrity. The Russian Kremlin-oriented post-Soviet political criminal nexus is a fifth column that Ukraine is very well aware of and suffers a lot from. And many in the West do not understand yet clearly or deeply enough the tremendous power and necessity, the power that this fifth column has, and the necessity for this column to be weeded out. Unfortunately, also, Ukrainian allies have not really realized the damage that has been done by the lack of lustration from the Ukrainian political environment. Lustration is the prohibition of individuals who partook in communist or supported communist activities from ever taking power or political roles, which has taken place in most Eastern European and Central European states, Poland and even Germany, Eastern Germany included. This fifth column uses transnational organized crime. It uses information security, and it is possible and necessary to defend and strategically plan a defense against it. Most clearly, we can see some of the issues of corruption in the European Union related to Gazprom, which we will cover a little bit later. We can see the impact or one branch of the impact of this fifth column in the United States as it pertains to elections and in the United States, and also television channels, non-governmental organizations, academic institutions that promote the narratives of the Russian Federation. And currently in Ukraine, what is really trending is something called de-oligarchization, or a proposal to draft a law to de-oligarchize Ukraine. And as I had mentioned earlier in the showing you the map of Ukraine immediately after its independence, a lot of the oligarchs that came to power actually came to power through transnational organized criminal behavior, because it was the fall of the Soviet Union and basically a mad West. However, this law seems a little bit superfluous and a little bit populistic, particularly because Ukraine actually does have a very good sets of laws. It's about the implementation of the laws that it has. And de-oligarchization would not be necessary if the rule of law existed and if Ukraine's court judicial system operated sufficiently and properly. So as we're looking at reforms in the coming years towards Ukraine, this judicial reform is probably one of the key reform areas that should be invested in and realized quickly. A prime example of this oligarch and Russian korupcja is a man called Viktor Medvedchuk, who is just recently publicly finally been recognized as a treacherous individual working directly under the command of the Kremlin. This gentleman has very close personal relations with, not gentleman, this man has very close relationships with Putin. And most recently, actually a couple of days ago, tapes have been leaked, recorded conversations between him and representatives of the Russian Federation in the non-controlled territories of Donbass, planning exchanges, planning planning the movement of armaments, and basically giving direct orders. This person also played a key role in promoting Russian propaganda inside of Ukraine's territory. And importantly, and also I have to give kudos where they're deserved, the Ukrainian position against these channels has been to shut them down. And while many people who do not understand the situation or do understand the situation and want to abuse human rights or civil political freedoms, say that freedom of speech, expression, media should not be violated. However, the consistent, consecutive, repeated messaging that was given out through those channels would satisfy the requirements of the European Court of Justice, for instance. So it's good that they're shut down and more needs to be done. He's not the only oligarch, but just one example of why oligarchs should be dealt with. Nord Stream. I would like to fly through Nord Stream a little bit because I'm not sure how we're doing with time. Okay. Nord Stream is a problem. And again, repeating that the United States has not implemented all of the sanctions that within its capacity currently against Nord Stream because it's almost completed, and the United States needs a Russia that is stable and predictable. Well, it's from all of the years that I have been studying the Russian Federation and its geopolitics, Russia has never been anything but predictable and reliable. Germany, on the other hand, has a critical role to play here. The relationship between Germany and the Kremlin is rather disturbing and also is directly related to demands that were made by the European Commission, the Competition Commission, DG Com, which in the early 2000s had demanded that strategic industry be privatized by states. So Germany did fight a little bit to keep power over its pipelines, but as a part of free market systems, it had to basically sell them. And this is one of the issues that we ran into Schroeder, and we're seeing continue to this day. I like this corruption pipeline title. Unfortunately, it's not mine. It was created by the East Europe Gas Analysis. Their website is quite interesting if you want to have more information about Nord Stream. Their website is down there on the bottom. And what I would like to just show you, what the Nord Stream 2 plans to do is divert the gas that is being brought through Ukraine to the European Union and southwards, divert it directly through Germany, northern Germany, via the Baltic Sea. This will take away about $3 billion of revenue from the Ukrainians annually, but also it will really weaken Ukraine's position in the market. So here's just to give you an idea of the current gas traveling situation from Russia through Ukraine onto the south and west. The military buildup in Ukraine, I have to tell you, was actually quite stressful. I was in Ukraine. I spent a lot of time in Ukraine, and at the time where we were seeing this buildup and hearing and watching the reports, it was not really a comfortable place to be. At the peak, the official numbers were over 150 boots along the border, all the way down, like from Belarus down to Crimea. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Ukrainian security services noted 100,000, and last week, the New York Times reported 84,000. Boots on the ground are easy to move, that's no issue. But the warplanes, submarines, heavy artillery, modern strategic tactical weapons, including airborne troops, motorized rifle and armored units, attack helicopters, smoke generators, reconnaissance drones, jamming equipment, and even a military hospital, who knows what else, still greatly remains alongside the borders of Ukraine. And the $1 million question is, why are they doing this and who will it serve? And teams that support democracy and rule of law should really be able to work on answering this question to make it work in our benefit. So this is a Ukrainian map. I apologize for not having the time to translate it, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of what type of machinery and the numbers of machinery, the units that had been put alongside our borders. So if we see here Belarus, it's important to note that the Russian Federation also has military placed around this part of the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. And train railroad tracks have been apparently being built there for the last few years. So Ukraine is not looking very safe, and most of this equipment remains. Importantly, this buildup has really started to crescendo already last year, and the tension was raising, and the level of tension that we feel on the ground in Ukraine is actually incredibly high, to the point where in Kiev, the city council had created an interactive map that we could know where the underground shelters are within the city, and where the hospitals and places to run and hide would be. The questions are these related to exercises? As we know, like last year we had the Russian exercises, the Kavkaz. This year, actually in this month and next month, we have the largest NATO exercise in the last 25 years taking place in the Black Sea region, Defender Europe 21. And also we have Zapad, the Russian military exercises scheduled for 10 to 16 September. So tensions are building again, going back to regular citizens. Everybody is very concerned, and I think that this is also a part of this, the purposeful psychological operation being committed against Ukraine and its allies. This is very important to note, that while Ukraine is working abroad with its allies trying to defend itself and figure out how best to cooperate against Russian aggression, there is a desperate need in Ukraine for legislation for territorial defense. And there's a draft law 4504, which had been submitted in December, but has not yet come to the table. Many excuses are being put forth. But the general idea for the territorial defense is to have a territorial defense under the chain of command of the Ministry of Defense, also including volunteers, so engaging veterans and volunteers on the ground, not only for military resistance, but also for permanent training for first response, which Ukraine really needs, so medical care, and also anti-propaganda information and patriotic training. So please do pay attention. If this is of interest, this is one piece of legislation that really requires attention. NATO has been around Ukraine, and Ukraine has been around NATO for many, many years, starting the relationship with a partnership for peace, a formal relationship with partnership for peace in the early to mid 90s. It has now transitioned through to include NATO trust funds. There are professional development programs. Just recently, Ukraine has become an enhanced opportunity partner and is more and more intensively working in the cyber cooperation fields. However, Ukraine does not have the membership action plan, which, as its name suggests, is a plan that NATO creates to prospective members, that once you get it, the idea is you do what's on that paper and then you become a member. It's highly unlikely that Ukraine will get such a map, and if it does get such a map, there are no timelines connected to this map. So Ukraine could become a member within 1 year or 20 years. So I don't think it's really that smart for Ukraine to call for map and full membership with NATO at this time, although it must formulate its policies and its objectives in line with Ukraine's defense strategy and national security strategies, that in a way that the Ukrainian issue will be satisfied and some sort of resolution to these questions provided after the summit on the 14th of June. The NATO summit is going to take place. Ukraine is going to be discussed, obviously. Notably, Ukraine is not invited. alongside other partner countries who have not been invited to this summit. Although some people take offense to it, and credibly so, it is understandable why the summit would not want to have the partners partaking in these meetings at this time. Notably, Ukraine doesn't have a NATO ambassador, so there's a little bit of dissonance going on for almost 2 years. So we're waiting for Ukraine to appoint a NATO ambassador, just as badly as Ukraine is waiting for the United States to appoint a US ambassador, which has also been missing for about 2 years. The key question that I think that we should be focusing on when it comes to NATO and Ukraine's Western allies supporting and protecting its and securing its territorial sovereignty and independence is really looking at how NATO can actually help the United Kingdom and the US live up to their security assurances that are found in the Budapest Memorandum. Because Russia is afraid of NATO. This is a no-brainer, and it has done a great job in creating calm and progress in the Baltic states, as well as states including Northern Macedonia, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, even Albania. So sometimes Ukraine becomes a little bit upset because Ukraine is a little bit more progressed than Albania, and they see or perceive a sliding scale of demands. However, Ukraine is a special case, and some of these sliding demands are justified. What Russia is very good at, even though it's afraid of NATO, is causing and creating havoc using a cyber warfare. And I love this picture because it actually really encapsulates what Russia does, not only in the Black Sea region, literally taking over territory, and importantly, I forgot to mention gas reserves in the continental shelf and exclusive economic zone of Ukraine. But that's another story. So the cyber world is growing and at huge speeds, and Ukraine proudly is a world leader in digitization. It does call sometimes for really serious ethical and moral considerations of how far digitization is going to go. Currently, Ukraine remains the only country in the world that that recognizes a electronic passport. It gives the same weight to an electronic passport as it does to a paper passport. The Eurasia Foundation, actually in TAPA's program, Transparency, Accountability, and Public Administration and Services, has done a significant job in really cooperating with Ukraine in digitization. Cybersecurity legislation is moving forward, and actually proud to say Ukraine is starting to create more and more sound strategies which are being reflected solely in the legislation that is then passed by the parliament. We're currently waiting for the president to sign a decree and put into power the recent, the proposed 21 to 25 cyber strategy. The previous strategy, 16 to 20, was only 40% realized, which is an issue, but is being addressed. I'll tell you how on the next slide. And Ukraine is actually quite a key player in international cyber security cooperation. It's important to note that a lot of people confuse or still do not have enough clarity when we're discussing cybersecurity or cyberspace, what actually it means. So from critical infrastructure to information sharing and protection, and also cybersecurity to cyber defense and cyber offense. This new strategy that is going to be coming out should be categorizing these specific targets, names, defining them in order for Ukraine to be able to move forward with its international partners, and mainly bilateral partner cooperations with the US, UK, Germany, Netherlands, and Japan, and multilaterally with the European Union and NATO. Again, very key is CyberFlag, the American initiative. Also, I think it was born out of the Marshall Center in Germany, creating a real cyber community. And this is where Ukraine is very interested, willing, and capable in being a key player. That having been said, CyberFlag, in the last few weeks, as the military buildup has been taking place and the tensions rising, Russian operatives or mouthpieces were highly critical of CyberFlag and really demeaning it. So by analyzing and reading their statements, it is clear that this is also something that they are extremely concerned about. The new ambassador of Ukraine to the United States, Oksana Markarova, just recently, I think it was last week, had noted that Ukraine has a lot to share on cyber, and it has this unique knowledge and background because of its positioning and because of Russia's interest in Ukraine. And many of the cyber attacks, and this is important, have been actually tipped off, detected in Ukraine before the United States were able to do so. Importantly, since the beginning of this year, together with the US partners, the Ukrainian security services have prevented over 350 cyber attacks since January. There was a dramatic increase compared to last year, where for the entire 12-month period of 2020, there were only 600 interrupted. So Ukraine does work with NATO on cybersecurity, and I predict that this is an area where we will see much more progress and hopefully mutual beneficial cooperation. There are some serious matters where Ukraine could use NATO's help, particularly in command and control systems that are required by the Ministry of Defense, General Staff. There are some major issues and problems there. But also Ukraine has innovation and some of the top experts in the world in cyber. The European Union has just completed some special cybersecurity exercises with representatives of the Ukrainian institutions. They have been funded by EU for Digital Ukraine, which is also partaking in the digitization of Ukraine and the DIA program, everything in your life and in your phone. And the Estonian government is clearly supporting this. Interestingly, Ukraine, through its UA30 Cyber Center, holds one of the most unique cyber centers in the world. There are only 20 of them globally. The United States is also playing an important role, not only through USAID, but also together with the FBI. FBI will deal more with identifying cyber criminals. Slightly different, but cybercrime is vast and in times of war, in times of peace, defined differently. Nonetheless, since 2017, in 2017, the Department of State pledged 10 million. Last year, in March, I believe, they added an additional 8 million to cybersecurity assistance. Now we have a new project which started last year as well, I believe in May, that is focused on building Ukraine's cybersecurity capabilities, particularly through critical infrastructure. And $38 million have been pledged to this program, and its main objectives are to support the legal and regulatory reform desperately needed in Ukraine in order to establish proper cyber defense, cyber security, and also provide for the necessary information exchange needed, not only information exchange across ministries and institutions, but also developing a cyber workforce so people know what to do. Very curious project, which is fabulous, is a retraining of veterans, and even with the option of their spouses to partake in training, cyber training, which is going to be not only for governmental purposes, but also for small and mid-sized business development, which brings us to the desperate, not desperate, that's the wrong word, the critical need for public-private sector cooperation. As we see the globalization happening, this cooperation becomes more and more necessary, and particularly in the cyber sectors and spheres. This is just to give you an idea of how many ministries and institutions are directly related in coordinating cybersecurity in Ukraine. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. And I would like to call to your attention that each of these ministries and councils, departments have their own sub-departments and people, and coordinating all of them and having them on one page is not an easy job. So I think that Ukraine does deserve a little bit of recognition in the progress that it is doing in coordinating them, in trying to get on one page. So going back to this cybersecurity strategy that I had mentioned in the previous slides, let's hope that that happens really quickly and gets published so Ukraine can move forward with its partners internally and internationally. This is the last topic in today's presentation, and it pertains to Ukraine's defense reform. And I'm also going to cover Ukraine's defense industry reform. This is one of my favorite pictures, and I use it often in my presentations when teaching about integrity at the Ministry of Defense. And these two gentlemen, for the people who are not aware, are actually crooks. And this one is ousted President Yanukovych, who is currently living and hiding in Russia under Putin's protection. And this gentleman to the left is a Russian operative, a GRU officer, so military intelligence officer, who managed to be appointed by this gentleman under the command of the Kremlin to not only the ministry, to head the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, but also to head the state-owned enterprise that was created in Yanukovych's time called Ukroboronprom. I forget who it was. I think it may have been Jeffrey Carver from the Potomac Institute that calls it Ukroboronporn, which I thought was kind of funny, and it is kind of proper because Ukroboronprom did very little to actually promote the development of Ukraine's defense industry, but that's all changing. Off the top, I would like to say that as far as we're looking at reform, we do have some pretty concerning issues related to communication and command between the Ministry of Defense and General Staff. And although Western reform does require or put forth civilian control of the MOD, and Ukraine does have a civilian Minister of Defense, the chain of command and the communications are often, there are issues there that need to be resolved in order for these two bodies to work at full capacity and capability. Defense legislation is ongoing, so this is positive. They are writing legislation. Black Trident team has also participated in the drafting of specific members of our team have participated in drafting some of these laws, particularly the legislation related to defense procurement. And going back to Ukroboronprom, basically, since the revolution of, or the so-called revolution of the 2014, Ukroboronprom has been targeted as something that should be reformed immediately, and actually it should no longer exist. In the previous years, under the team of reformers, including Abramovich's and Mustafa Naim and Roman Bondarenko, the draft law has been drafted, Law 3822, which puts forth a manner of corporatization of Ukroboronprom. So basically, Ukroboronprom had under its control over 140 defense companies. Currently, they have already transferred certain companies to the state's property fund, and other issues are being resolved. However, there's a little bit of a scandalous going on about the corporatization, the privatization, and some lack of cooperation taking place with the new Ministry of Strategic Industry, which I will talk about a little bit later. Disturbingly, maybe you can recall the oligarch, the Viktor Medvedchuk that I showed you in the previous pages. Viktor Medvedchuk is he leads the opposition party in Ukraine, and a person belonging to his party has just a couple of days ago been appointed to the board, the supervisory board of Ukроборонпром. And why it's disturbing is because not only is this party directly related to allegations of treason against the state of Ukraine, but it's also directly related to Salamatin, that former Minister of Defense and the former director of Ukроборонпром, who had managed to support Russia's policy towards Ukraine's industry by creating an institution that the concern Ukроборонпром would have control over all of the state-owned enterprises. And also it was designed to be able to hook up Ukraine's state-owned enterprise military concern to the Russian one. And apparently, due to the revolution and due to the fight that continues for freedom and democracy in Ukraine, Russia has not been able to do so. That having been said, some attention needs to be paid to the new Ministry of Strategic Industry, which has been tasked with over 150 tasks. Some of them under OECD analysis appear to be conflicting in their interests, and some appointees that have been put into that ministry are questionable. So there's a little bit of a delicate area. Ukроборонпром is transforming, corporatization will take place. The new ministry is going to be taking over its responsibilities and creating two blocks, initially 2 blocks for armaments, defense equipment, Air Force, and the third one potentially is space agency, may fall into the third block. So 3 clusters are going to be developed. Importantly, Ukроборонпром has moved into using Prozoro, a transparency system for procurement, and it claims to have saved about, I think, 600 million hryvnia since it has been implemented, and also increased the participants in tenders significantly, in the thousands. So this is really good, and important to note that Ukraine's private defense and manufacturers are alive and thriving. And they're represented by 2 major organizations, both of which are, so the Black Trident actually has a memorandum of understanding with Ukроборонпром and the Association of Ukrainian Defense Manufacturers, as well as the League. And the association and the League, they combine together to realize the interests of the private defense manufacturers, who play a relatively significant role in Ukraine's defense procurement and providing Ukraine's defense needs. 54% of the defense budget is fulfilled by them. Ukraine's defense budget is rising steadily. So in 2021, this year, it's 9.6 billion for defense, which is an 8% increase from 2020. Now, when we say defense budget, it is important to keep in mind that over 16 institutions, so the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Interior, both apply for these funds. And unfortunately, without going into much detail about the Ministry of Interior and all of the issues and question marks around that ministry, that their budget is not as transparent as that of the Ministry of Defense and does require some attention. Just yesterday, I believe it was, yesterday, Ukraine actually passed a resolution, the Cabinet of Ministers, that Ukraine will finally be purchasing defense goods through international agencies. So this will also lower the levels of corruption in the sector, by removing the intermediaries. Not all of them, of course, intermediaries are usually needed and will remain, but most, let's say, unnecessary intermediaries will now be no longer making money in that sector, hopefully. Yes, so importantly, as I mentioned, the MOD and the MIA, Ministry of Interior, are the ones who have this defense budget that they can acquire and procure weapons and equipment through. In the next 10 to 15 years, both of them need to have a complete overhaul, a replacement of their weapons and military equipment. So the market is there. Joint projects with Ukraine's partners are possible. Ukraine is really looking for this type of cooperation through joint ventures or research and development. Now, a very good news, if you can call it that, is that Ukraine is probably going to start being able to make its own munitions again. And there has been a sort of a hold on this, quite scandalous, but now we also see positive developments in this area. Public and private partnerships, so here's the correct percentage. So 52% of Ukraine's state defense order is filled by private defense manufacturers. And they're also very interested in promoting and developing partnerships and effective business relationships with foreign partners. So I will end this long presentation, which has been kind of heavy and not very fun, with a little story about the ugly duckling. And I believe that the people that are working on the ground in Ukraine to realize its transformation, and all of Ukraine's partners, albeit in the European Union, NATO, the United States, are really working hard because they see that it is not an ugly duckling and it is a swan that has a lot to offer. And again, some may ask, why should we care about Ukraine and why should American foreign policy even be bothered? Well, leaving all of the self-interest regarding democracy and stability and responsibility regarding non-proliferation of nuclear capabilities, Ukraine is ripe for business development and cooperation. We see it on the ground really quickly developing innovation. The land of Ukraine is fertile and the population is intelligent. And maybe this is one of the things that we can thank COVID for, is that a lot of the bright minds have returned to Ukraine. On that note, I would like to say thank you, and I will stop sharing the screen.
Lada, thank you very, very much. That was an excellent overview of Ukraine, pretty much all things Ukraine. Because of the time, I'm going to limit to 2 questions. I'm going to read to you here that are out of the chat box. One is, what are your thoughts on the SBU reforms?
It's a secret. They're very necessary. And particularly if we're looking at the areas and controls over the economy and corruption. SBU reforms are a long time coming, and as you can imagine, NATO advisors, EU advisors have been in place. And it's important to note, actually, I think that one of your speakers had mentioned, advisors should not be the solution, and a little bit more trust is needed in order for it to move forward. But we have progress already. The new national security legislation of 2018 includes intelligence services as something that falls under democratic civil control and oversight.
Thank you. This one is a little bit more to do with the people. Back in 2017-18, there was a school language law in Ukraine which caused ethnic turmoil and follow-on impacts to its neighbors. How much does Russia capitalize on the ethnic social divisions to disrupt Ukrainian foreign and internal relations?
That's a fantastic question, and it does so excellently. And it continues to do so. Most recently, so one of the things that Russia is really good at doing is violating human civil political rights, but turning it around and victimizing the victim. And just most recently, There was a video I was thinking about sharing on this during this webinar, but decided against it. You can Google it if you want. It's from the representative of the DNR speaking on Channel 24 Russian Federation, saying, helping Ukraine, approaching Ukrainians via TV, saying, guys, you speak Russian and we will come and help you. Do you miss Russian culture? Do you miss Russian stability? Come work with us, support us, and we're your saviors. So Russia continues, but Ukraine is also continuing. Slowly but surely, Ukrainian culture is coming, reviving, and even more so, it's blooming.
I'm going to give you one last question, then we'll give you a couple seconds for any final remarks you have. So you've talked a lot about the importance of Ukraine for international purposes. What can the average citizen do of the United States or Europe to stay more informed, and should they be influencing or try to influence our government to have different approaches to Ukraine?
Mm-hmm. To be more informed, I suggest reading Ukrainian media sources that have an English, available English versions, and know your senators, know your congressmen. If you're interested in specific topics, you can reach out to experts, you can reach out to me, but staying involved and up to date, and really using democratic institutes and institutions and rights to realize what you think Ukraine needs to have support from the US.
Well, Lada, thank you again so much. This was a topic I've been anxiously waiting to listen to, and you did an excellent job of explaining it. I'll turn it over to you for any last minute remarks, and then we'll wrap this up.
I would just like to thank everybody for paying attention and tuning in. I'm sorry for going a little bit of overtime, and if anybody has any interest in or would like to learn more or work and cooperate with Black Trident, you could just get in touch with Doug, and Doug, and Doug could make the introductions.
Great. Again, this is Doug Hurst, I'm the CEO of Third Order Effects. We appreciate everybody's attendance today. In a couple of days, this talk will be available on our website to review again or to share with others. Thanks again, and have a great week and a great Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you.